glorious summer by this sun of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking glass, I, that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world, scarce half made up, and that so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them. Why, I, in this weak and piping time of peace, have no delight to pass away the time, unless to spy my shadow in the sun and descant on mine own deformity.
Many of you will no doubt recognize these famous lines from the opening soliloquy of Richard III, ably delivered by Matt Carter. Did you notice the way in which Matt was moving and the qualities of his voice? Tonight, my actors and I will show you some of the choices actors have made in playing the deformity of Richard III. Deformity and Richard are so closely linked that I would argue that it is the central driving force of the character. The different performances we will discuss show changes in view on deformity, as well as changing theories on the actor's craft. Every actor is interested in the human body. Every actor is interested in how the mind and body work together. And most importantly, every actor is interested in how to present the mind and body of a character to an audience in a clear and articulate way. No matter how an actor decides to represent it, Richard's deformity of mind and body are essential to the understanding of the character. In his first soliloquy in the play Henry VI, Part 3, Richard expresses a deep pain, sorrow, and bitterness at being denied a normal body. As Gemma delivers this speech, ask yourself, do you pity him? Does this man have a reason to be angry?
Why, love forswore me in my mother's womb, and for I should not deal in her soft laws, she did corrupt frail nature with some bribe, to shrink mine arm up like a withered shrub, to make an envious mountain on my back, where sits deformity to mock my body, to shape my legs of an unequal size, to disproportion me in every part. And am I then a man to be beloved? Oh, monstrous fault to harbor such a thought.
In his speech, like the one that Matt delivered, Richard expresses the belief that deformity is a curse. As Glenn explained, during the Renaissance, people believed that deformity was a mark of evil and a sign of being cursed by God, like the mark of Cain in the Bible. Richard's deformity signifies that he was determined to prove a villain. The deformity also gives Richard's actions psychological motivation. Lacking a normal body, Richard is hungry for revenge and in search of that which will elevate him above more fortunate people, power. The first Richard was almost certainly Richard Burbage, Shakespeare's star actor. Burbage was associated with the role long after his death. In the following eulogy spoken by David, Burbage is remembered for his most famous roles, Hamlet, Edward II, and Crookback, aka Richard.
A funeral elegy on the death of the famous actor Richard Burbage, who died on Saturday in Lent, the 13th of March, 1618. No more young Hamlet, though but scant of breath, shall cry, "Revenge!" for his dear father's death. Edward shall act a representative, and Crookback, as befits, shall cease to live.
Unfortunately, we have no information on how Burbage played the deformity. We do have one clue as to how his performance might have been received. From the diary of law student John Manningham in an entry dated 13th March 1602 reads,
Upon a time when Richard Burbage played Richard III, there was a citizen grew so far in liking with him that before she left him the play, she appointed him to come to her that night by the name of Richard III. Shakespeare, overhearing their conclusion, went before, was entertained, and at his game ere Burbage came. The message being brought that Richard III was at the door, Shakespeare caused return to be made that William the Conqueror was before Richard III.
Although this story is apocryphal, it does hit upon other features of Richard's deformity, his supreme confidence and his beast-like sexuality. Scholars have pointed out not just scholars but actors too, that Richard's lack of scruples, the result of being born deformed, makes him completely focused and confident. Likewise, his nonconformity to traditional standards of beauty could be seen as a rebellion against traditional social norms, and thus a strange aphrodisiac. This creature, without a recognizable human shape, manages to exert a dark pull on the audience. During the Restoration theater of the 17th century, Shakespeare's plays were largely out of fashion, and playwrights such as Colley Cibber began to rewrite and adapt them. It was Cibber's play, not Shakespeare's, which became the model for stage portrayals of Richard III for nearly 300 years. Cibber's text reinterprets the story of Richard as one man's evil rise to the crown, not the culminating story of the Wars of the Roses. Cibber condensed scenes, omitted scenes without Richard, and gave Richard 10% more of the dialogue than Shakespeare. Cibber's text also re-emphasizes the importance of deformity to Richard's character, adding 8 more uses of the word deformed or ugly. To further the point, Cibber inserts text from other Shakespeare plays about Richard's deformity, such as Henry VI's speech spoken earlier by Gemma. Amanda will demonstrate Cibber's cut-and-paste rewriting of Shakespeare's histories with this speech, where the Lady Anne mourns for the death of King Henry VI, using lines that Shakespeare wrote for the death of King Henry V.
Hung be the heavens with black, yield day to night. Comets, importing change of times and states, brandish your fiery tresses in the sky, and with them scourge the bad revolting stars that have consented unto Henry's death. Oh, be accursed the hand that shed his blood, accursed the head that had the heart to do it. If ever he have wife, let her be made more miserable by the life of him than I am now by Edward's death and thine.
Cibber also wrote original speeches for Richard, such as this one, in which Richard resolves to woo the Lady Anne in spite of his deformity.
But see, my love appears. Look where she shines through her dark veil of rainy sorrows. 'Tis true, my form perhaps may little move her, but I've a tongue shall wheedle with the devil.
Cibber's text was extremely popular with actors because it raised Richard's importance to a star role. Actors such as David Garrick made their debut as Cibber's Richard, and some of Cibber's lines still survive in Ian McKellen and Laurence Olivier's film versions of Richard. In the 20th century, Olivier was considered, for a brief time, the definitive Richard. In his film version, Olivier plays Richard as a seductive, charismatic monster. Olivier utilized Richard's physical disabilities as well as the cinematic techniques to reveal his moral depravity. I'm going to take a second and talk about some of these cinematic techniques. You'll notice in this shot, Olivier is literally below a crowd. As I said, Cibber's story is about one man's wicked rise to the crown. This is an homage to Cibber's interpretation, I believe. Now, moving on to this slide. At this moment, Richard literally takes the audience by the hand, putting his hand towards the camera. Notice how also the shot pans out as he limps towards the crowd, literally and figuratively. This also exposes his hump and his limp. Thus, utilizing the deformity, we see this dramatization of one man's struggle to obtain the crown. Another use of Olivier's cinematic techniques to further the story is his use of shadows. In this shot, from the opening soliloquy of Richard III, we see Richard casting a bizarre silhouette as he leaves the camera. He slinks away, leaving his bizarre silhouette to unfurl like a snake. And finally, in this shot, Olivier, the shadow of Richard's head appears as he stares into the cell of his brother Clarence, whom he plans to murder. We see through this shot, Richard looms as a great evil presence. After Olivier, actors more or less abandoned the approach of playing Richard as a monster in favor of a human, more natural approach. The role of Richard, however, presents a challenge for actors attempting a literal interpretation of deformity. They are attempting to play a deformity that they do not actually have. Thus, they are attempting to do something unnatural within the precepts of naturalistic acting. Anthony Scher's massive preparation for the role using method acting techniques involved both a thorough research into the physical effects of real disabilities and a deep examination of its psychological effects. Scher's acting process included real-life experience. His famous use of crutches was inspired by a real-life incident in which, playing the fool in King Lear, he accidentally tore his Achilles tendon and was forced to be on real crutches for several. The first thing that he recalls in his book, A Year of the King, was that being on crutches made him angry, especially when other people gazed at him on the crutches. From there, he also went into research in physical disabilities. He talked to a physiotherapist. He saw documentaries with people who had undergone various physical deformities. And he also talked to specialists in medical conditions such as kyphosis and scoliosis. He also did image research. Glenn, in his presentation, quoted Queen Margaret, who refers to Richard in various beast-like terms. Scher drew inspiration on one in particular, Bottled Spire. Using his massive hump and the extra crutches, he created the persona of looking like a spider on stage, having more or less legs. Finally, Scher also used psychoanalysis. He brought Shakespeare's text to a real psychiatrist to put Richard on the couch. This led Scher to go into a deep psychological probing of Richard's mind. He viewed the deformity as a source of deep pain, through which we can identify with Richard as a human being. Listen to how David, applying method-inspired textual analysis, conveys Richard's human emotions.
But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court in amorous looking glass. I, that am rudely stamped, and want love's majesty to strut before a wanton ambling nymph. I, that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, set before my time to this breathing world, scarce half made up, and that so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them.
There is an inherent paradox in trying to represent an actual disability like Scher did. No matter how much research the actor does, he cannot completely understand the deformity or disability because it is not real. For this reason, Scher's Richard created an unexpected backlash from the disabled community. Some people found it offensive that an able-bodied man was trying to play a state of being that he could not completely represent. One response to this is that a number of Richards have been played by actors who actually possess real physical disabilities. In Peter Dinklage in 2004 played the role with none of the traditional deformities, no hump, no whip arm, no limp. The only difference being that his small size, he suffers from dwarfism, literally hindered him from taking the crown. In the production, he had incredibly long robes that were designed for a larger person, which is the throne, and the throne was clearly designed for a larger king. Critics writing about this performance in the Columbia Dispatch claimed that watching Dinklage was more real than watching a costume piece created by somebody, worn by somebody like Scher. You weren't watching a performance. You watched a real man with a real struggle. Another response to this problem of naturalism is to abandon it and for favor of a more stylized approach. And this was the approach favored by the ASC in 2002 with John Harrell and Thad McQuaid. And I'm fortunate to have them here, and we're going to talk a little bit about that particular production. Okay, now I've talked to you both a little bit for my thesis research, and I wanted to first start off by talking about why you chose to represent the disability at all. Thad, I remember you saying that the first thing you had to do was decide whether to do any kind of physical encumbrance of the role. Why did you choose to use, what is actually a bowling ball covered with a sheath?
It's a ball.
So what was the, you said earlier when we were talking about how there was a sort of, you were kind of inspired by a real life experience to the bowling ball.
A little bit, yeah. It's interesting though, because that it is definitely the case that everybody who talks to me about that show talks about the bowling ball. And I always wondered, and I wondered, I didn't really think about it then, but I wonder in retrospect how many audience members who didn't have some sort of inside here actually knew that that's what it was. Did it seem to be sort of self-evidently a bowling ball to people who thought it was? I mean, I'm not sure, but it is sort of the thing that comes back to me a lot, was that, and because of that, I wish that I had done something different. But I think, two things. One, the idea of playing no deformity, per se, and sort of having something very minor, maybe, that other people seemed to blow out of proportion, to me brought a much more sort of psychological load to what I was going to have to do as an actor, which is kind of build up this self-hatred kind of thing out of what I heard other people say. And I really wasn't especially interested in that. I'm more interested, or at least 7 years ago, I was more interested in playing Richard as a monster that he seemed to be, or at least as a really fun person to watch on stage who wins all of his battles until he starts losing them, you know. And so I wanted, I thought that looked like a more interesting thing to play. So I was more interested in, or less interested in a human being with disabilities as an actor who was hobbling himself by eliminating certain physical abilities. Like I tied my legs together with a leather thong, which seemed, not the one I'm wearing now, but but it seemed, that eliminated obviously certain movement choices. And the bowling ball, gave me a counterweight that was sort of mysterious, I think. It's much heavier than it looks. It's hard to carry a bowling ball around that much. But specifically, the look for the bowling ball, which is what you asked me 5 minutes ago before I started answering, was when I started working here, I had just been working for a couple of years at a winery, and spent a lot of time in the vineyard, and there is I think it comes up in a lot of plants, people who work with plants, but on grapevines, there's a particular condition called crown gall that grows along the root of vine, and it is really disgusting. It's like this sort of, it doesn't affect all vines, but it kills them, and it's gross, and it's lumpen, and sort of brown, and just sort of nasty looking. And I thought that might be, that was my sort of tie to the bag around the hand, just sort of this kind of gross, something, whatever the curse or whatever that's on Richard seems to have sort of accrued around his hand. That was kind of what I was going for. And then I sewed it myself, so that's why it looks like a bag.
One thing I remember that I thought was really interesting was that you said that, I can attest this personally, because one time Thad put a weight in my hand, strapped it to my hands, and tried to tie my legs together, and he said, "Now try and walk normal." Yeah. And the first thing I thought was, "I hate you."
Yes.
You said that what's interesting about this is, in a sense, you don't need to do anything psychological, because it's not that you don't have psychological, but the struggle becomes more apparent when you do it this way.
Yeah, look, it's all about time. It's all about, you can't do everything. So you always, in every show, you disable yourselves, your collaborators, your cast, the audience, with certain choices. You differentiate them with certain choices. For me, there was, and also I should say that there were also other issues. One of the reasons that I was brought here was not because I was the best person in the world to direct Richard III, but because John and I and two other members of this cast of this first season for this lovely playhouse had been working together for 6 or 7 years in a very, very different way than when we had been actors here. And part of my brief was to bring some of that work, some of that knowledge, some of that vocabulary, and that influenced certain kinds of choices, and certain, where you see perhaps a choice that was, this is one that's more, let's say, conventional, whether it's perceived as naturalistic or stylized or whatever. That one is more conventional of performances these days, and one that is less. In addition to my own sensibility, there was also a kind of a professional obligation in a way to push the whole company into this other kind of direction.
But I just really want to underscore very quickly, believe it or not, that when we talk about these things, I think it's super important to keep certain things separate, even perhaps later on. And one is the work of the actor. What is the actor doing, both in preparation and also on stage? The experience of the actor may be something very, very different, and still work on their psychology, if that's what you want to do, like all the ball strap here. And then is the experience of the audience, which is always, even if it's very, very close for one moment and one audience member. It's always a different thing. And I think that's very important when we're
Well, that review of Peter
Dinklage
Dinklage being a man with a crisis, not a performance, is great. That's a great review for Peter Dinklage. That's not how he saw what he was doing. But I bet he turns around and thinks, sweet, that guy totally overlooked the fact that I was acting on his and saw this guy and can't get it from.
Or he was listening because he was trying to act.
You're doing great.
Of course, everyone always goes, oh, it's so great. He's so small.
Well, I think that's a good point to end on.
My conclusion actually has a lot to do with the audience, and so I wanted to thank you guys for volunteering your time. So, to conclude, Richard's stage history can sort of be boiled down into four basic stages. First, the attractive, seductive monster is represented by Olivier. Second, the deeply angry and deeply resentful psychopath represented by Cher, whose anger comes from his own deformity and the views of deformity espoused by those around him. Third is the portrayal of deformity as a source of sympathy in the portrayals of Holden and Dinklage. And finally, the decision to be more stylized, which is what John and Thad were attempted to do. All these changes in performance came as response to the audience's changing perceptions of deformity. As society changes, its perceptions of deformity from a curse to a source of pity, audiences have changed the way that they have seen the play as a whole. The actor uses his own method, if you will, to represent the deformity, but ultimately the perception of what deformity is lies in the perceptions of the audience. This is why an actor must both hone in on how he chooses to represent the deformity, whether psychological or physical, and take into consideration the views of his modern audience. Thank you.